and welcome to another episode of Kirk Chats. I'm your host, Reverend Jasmine Smart, and I am so excited to be bringing a guest with you virtually today, the Reverend Judi McMillan, who has been in the Detroit Presbytery a few years ago, but in October, she moved to Arkansas. But she and I got to be friends a couple years ago, and I'm so excited that we can have this conversation for Fox Run today. So thanks, Judi, for coming.
Thanks, Jasmine. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
So I usually ask my guests to bring an object, and I was remembering that you gave me this idea to do this because we were talking about how when we get older, a lot of times we downsize, or just in different transitions in our life, we might downsize. Mm-hmm. And what object do you want to take with you when you do that? What specifically around faith, but just what's something really important? And you were like, you came up with this idea when we were talking about this podcast a long time ago. So I'm excited to see if you have an object of your own to bring for us.
I do. I have an object. It's got a few different thoughts with it. So it's right here. So what it is it's actually a piece that my daughter made in a ceramics class, which I love the piece itself. It's just beautiful. And if you've ever taken a ceramics class, it takes a while to get a feel for the clay and pulling it and throwing it. And of course, scripture references Jeremiah, go down to the potter's house, and God's wants Jeremiah to look at the act of creation. So one, I love that my daughter makes pottery, which actually was my major in college. So had I known that, I would have kept everything I'd ever done with ceramics and just given it to her. She did get a bunch of my tools. But what I did is I used this to hold my favorite watercolor paintbrushes. So if I were to downsize and go from a home to an apartment or live even, in a place with my kids, I would definitely take my art supplies. So I have some of my favorite watercolor brushes, and I store them in a container that I can look at on my desk and remember my daughter. But the other thing that I love about art in my family is that my kids are both very creative. So my son and my daughter both love to make art and do things artistically. So that means I can give them lots of different kinds of gifts. So again, it's kind of a generational thing, but I love the color. I love the piece. I love holding it. I love using it. So I would take this with me now as a piece of art, and it connects to my faith because I think when we attend to those creative pieces of ourselves, whether it's, doing our nails or getting our hair done by someone who's an artist, or making something and giving it away, I just think that's a God gift. So God gifts us with all these ways to nourish and nurture ourselves and challenge ourselves, but also share with those we love. And so then I also brought, because I have started to do watercolor cards, so I just brought a picture of a card that I did using those brushes there that I bought during the pandemic. So that was my object for today. So
thank you for sharing. I mean, there's so many layers there.
There are.
There's the family. You've mentioned your daughter, and just having that reminds you of her. There's your own connection to art and kind of the creative outlet. You talked about the potter's wheel as scripture. Can you tell me too? So I just have to ask about the quilt on your wall, because it's nice, big, and beautiful.
Yes. So, and I'm trying to remember the design, the name of the design, but yeah, so I made that several years ago, and I've put it in now 2 offices. So one was at Sterling Heights when I was at New Life, that hung in my office. And then when I moved here, the church wanted to paint the walls, which I thought was so sweet. So I chose this color called Imagination, which is a really light purple, and it goes with the quilt. And the other thing I love about that quilt is that you can see the circles. You can kind of look and see circles, and there are so many different colors, I know, but close up. And I love that because I love the image of the circle, that God is infinite and yet can expand the circle, and we're all included. So, and then the shepherd's crook there was given to me when I was installed here, and that, the quilt being warm, being snuggled, and vibrant. That all speaks to me too. So thanks for noticing.
Yes, of course. I mean,
Yeah.
that's one thing I've loved about Zoom is kind of and I think people are more intentional about it now than they used to be. Like, what books do you have behind you? If they're very visible and you get a screenshot of like someone on TV, like, okay, what book are they reading? So your space is so colorful and so vibrant.
I have throughout my life made and sold art. In seminary, I took a J term at Ghost Ranch and did 3 weeks of ceramics in New Mexico. And then when I came back to seminary, my last year, I had an art show. I think I sold most of the things that I made. So that was fun. And, when I was living in Troy, Michigan, I took a metalsmithing class, and I've done woodworking at Washtenaw Community College, made some furniture. So really, I don't know. I think there's a lot of skill set there. And had I not been called to ministry, I might have settled down and chosen a medium and stuck with it. But what I think is so beautiful is that whatever I feel like learning, or, it's hard to pick a tool to bring, but that's what's inspiring me now. So I feel like that kind of feeds into my creative side and gives me space to be me. So that when I'm in my ministry role and setting, I have a well to draw from. And so I really think that creative spark, wherever we find it, can be a source for us, no matter how old we are. And there's a woman in my church who's amazing. Her name is Nori, and she's a ceramicist and a potter, and she sells at the local art store here. And everyone in the church knows her, and they all want to buy her gifts for others. So, and I've been to her home. And when Michaela visited a couple of weeks ago at Christmas time, a couple months ago, we went to her home, and Michaela and I threw together in my neighbor, in my member's home, in her basement. And that was the first time Michaela saw me throw, and the first time I saw her throw. It was really kind of amazing, So that's a way to be connectional. Also, I love doing retreats where art is involved in some small way or big way. So that's been really fun too. And a few people in the presbytery have a couple stoles that I made. So I've made stoles, quilted stoles, before for people. So that's another way to share.
Yeah. And I think the woodworking, you've done that with your dad a little bit too, right?
Yes. So we've, last summer I went, and during the week when I was there, when was I there? August, we made a dining room table out of walnut. That was fun.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I think that's so interesting that you say, because I'm thinking of Paul, the Apostle Paul, being a tent maker. Like that's where we get that phrase that, are you a tent maker ministry? Because so many of our churches can't afford full-time pastors now, or like people have always felt called to evangelism and had a full-time job. So I could definitely see one day, if you're semi-retired, you pastor a little bit, but then you also are working on your different, I don't know which one, but one of your
whichever one, right? Yeah. Well, and I also thought it would be fun to have someday, and I have a nice home and people could visit, but to have a studio set up for people so that if they don't get to, have a lot of creative time when they're visiting, to have that creative time. So I've been thinking down the road what that would look like to have sort of a nice community artistic space, whether it's in the church or in your home, or, a senior center. Do some of the senior centers have creative spaces? I know they have places to eat and exercise and libraries, but what about a creative art space with some really nice tools and teachers even? So
I feel like whenever I've done art, it's like, I want it to be good.
Right. You want the product. You're not necessarily really excited about the process. You're like, I really want it to be a nice object.
Yeah. So it's definitely helped me kind of reframe that even the process itself is valuable just for its own sake. And the social work team, behavioral health, social work, and spiritual care, we did like a visioning board a couple weeks ago.
That's right. I think I saw you.
Yeah. Normally I would have like stressed over it and like found the perfect, but I was just like, okay, I like this, I like that, let's just do it. And it was really calming and kind of just reflective to do it with other people too. So
that's cool, because when I saw you post that, I talked to my coach. I have a clergy coach about that, and she said, well, why don't you you light up when you talk about that creative process. Why don't you try that with your, because I have an upcoming retreat this weekend with my leaders. So we're going to try a bigger one. We're going to each take a piece and try to do a visioning board, but in small groups and put it together. I have no idea what it's going to look like. So I'm going to trust that they'll come up with something cool. So,
right.
Yeah.
That sounds great. And as you were talking too, I am, I know there was a stole maker at Kirk in the Hills as well. And she and I have had conversations about art in the church and just the way, like whether it's the paraments, which is what we call the fabric on the pulpit, or, fabric in different places. Our stoles are like art each week. Different churches have different architecture that really affects the artistic space, but I love your idea about, there are some churches that have an artist in residence, or just like a theologian in residence, or a songwriter in residence, that to open the church up to that creative space and really let it be together instead of I don't know, being suspicious of it or saying, oh, that's too secular. That really, it is such an important part of our identity as creatures of God, because God is a creative person, right? Like we're participating in the creative nature of God. Yeah. When we do it.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. I know you love being outside and you're a bicyclist. And so I imagine you're just taking advantage of the outdoors. You said it's like 60 degrees where you are today?
It should be. Yeah. I forget I could check my weather app, but yeah, it's, right now it's 55 and sunny. So it might get warmer this weekend, but yeah, we have bike trails everywhere. So this Northwest Arkansas, is a place that was built up by the Walmart, the Waltons and the Walmart Foundation, and their money has gone to, work on the trail system around here. And the community says they're the biking capital of the world, and they'll probably get there someday. There's hundreds and hundreds of miles of mountain biking trails and road biking. It's pretty. There's lakes to go kayaking. I saw golfers out today, February. Yeah, it's pretty here. So, and then, a few other big businesses are in this area. And a lot of people are moving here. They're expecting another 500,000 people, I've heard, in the next 10 years. So.
Yeah, I think when you first moved, I was like, what's in Arkansas?
What's in Arkansas? I know most people don't think of that Arkansas at all, right? Yeah. What's there?
Yeah. So that's wonderful to know that it is, because you are such a, engaged person in your community. So I know you like to go to restaurants and things. So I'm glad you're not in a barren wasteland.
No. And Bentonville's pretty. Rogers, they all have lots of different little nooks and crannies. There's fishing, there's kayaking. I'm looking forward to trying kayaking more. We have several little lakes around here. Yeah, just really beautiful. Yeah, it's a beautiful spot. So
I know at one point you had an idea for a bicycling community called Holy Spokes.
Holy Sprockets. Yes.
Holy Sprockets.
Yeah.
Do you want to say a little bit about that and what your idea was?
Yeah, so my idea was to create a community that wanted to not only be active and outside, but also work on social justice issues of some kind. So the presbytery here, the Arkansas Presbytery, is a Matthew 25 presbytery, like Detroit was, and they're encouraging churches to study and figure out if they want to work on issues of poverty, anti-racism, or to be vital. And so we're gonna, I think, inch that way and invite some speakers and try to consider that. I do know there are some cyclists in our church and hikers and people who are active, and a few would like to do some more of that in-depth study. So I think down the road, that's my vision. This first year, I'm concentrating on visiting every member, not just in crisis, but, visiting their homes and getting to know them or having a meal together. So that's my year one focus. And then year two will be, what are some of these next deeper steps? So we are studying books, we're doing that kind of thing, but to do that more intentionally. And, today I was getting physical therapy on my shoulders because I was way too active on those. And, we put too much on our shoulders anyway. So, but the young woman who was giving me PT was saying she loves to go cycling. And I said, oh, do you have anybody you go with? And she said, well, my husband likes to do downhill, but he's crazy. He goes way too fast. And I just want to find someone to do the hills. I'm like, I'm your girl. We should go sometime. So And she was fascinated that I was a female pastor. She said she goes to a church that is more conservative. She wanted to be baptized by a woman. They said, we don't allow that. And I was like, that's fascinating. I never would have thought I want to be baptized by a woman, So she's really curious. And so I thought, this might be a thing to really get to know people. When I was at New Life in Sterling Heights, we did a couple rides and then helped coordinate with the Detroit Presbytery, a Black Lives Matter ride. And we got 50, 60 people to go. So kids came, youth, parents, families, anyone who was really, thinking about what it means to be, have our identity, but want to live in God's diverse community in authentic ways. So that's really my goal for that, would be to hook up with people who want to have those deeper conversations. And I think sometimes, and those conversations are hard, I'm a privileged white lady and I don't have too many wants or needs. So I come from a place of privilege, but I also think that God calls us to a deeper awareness of our brothers and sisters and where they may be hurting or where they may want to share. And so creating safe spaces for us to have those conversations and being active and outside might be a good place, because then we're not as, closed into the walls around us. We're literally outside breathing fresh air and having conversations, and we don't have to fear other people's ideas. So that's kind of my thinking about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think I ever really pieced that together, because it is true that because it is such a divisive, visceral reaction. If you mentioned Black Lives Matter, people are going to feel very strongly. So to do that outside where, it doesn't feel quite as like you're trapped, right?
Yeah.
That you do have that freedom to dialogue and to talk about it. So recognizing that you're a pastor, but you're also just a human, you're your own person. And, you have felt strongly about this personally. And so you kind of still have to balance so how do I follow my conscience on this and do what I think is right, while also leading a diverse community of, people of diverse views. But I wonder if you could say a little bit more about, what personally drew you to social justice and to caring about that issue. As you said, as a white person, what is our responsibility to talk about this in your mind?
Gosh, so I think back to, I don't know, I think maybe it could be part of my DNA that God placed inside of me, just this, what's right and what's wrong. And whenever you see someone who's excluded for whatever reason, LGBTQI issues, racism, sexism, that, understanding that God called all of creation good, didn't say, except for this part, and so I think a deep and abiding love for God and God's creation. So I start there. And then the diversity around us, the diversity of plant life and animal life and people and cultures, that speaks to me. And, every time Jesus encountered someone, he didn't put them in a box. Instead, there was a conversation or a freeing moment, or your faith has made you well. And he always said your faith, not your faith in me or your, but what brought you here and the courage it took to get to this place has made you well. So I think we can have deeper conversations because Jesus did, a couple of weeks ago, preaching the woman at the well and her being outside, an outsider, a Samaritan. So one that may have been hated by Jewish people, a woman. She had other things that we've put on her, but she comes and they have this deep theological conversation. And out of that conversation, she shares her experience with others and brings them to God. So I forget your question, but I think just inside of me is this sense of justice and what's right and what's wrong. So when we have a culture that continues to Well, I mean, we're a violent culture. We still haven't fixed the gun problem. We still haven't fixed that a lot of people will have handguns in the home, and there'll be suicides because it's easier. And a lot of men die of suicide because they have a gun in the house. And police reform and all these touchy subjects. But when George Floyd happened, and when we watched Breonna Taylor from a no-knock warrant get killed in her own bed, when we see these things happen, I believe the church's responsibility is to talk about it, pray about it, address it, have conversations, and not put our blinders on and say, well, it didn't happen to us, because our neighbors are who Jesus said we need to love and be a presence with. So, it means taking those risks. So of course, even this conversation is risky, right? Because I know I serve a congregation that is diverse, and we call ourselves a purple church, right? So we have a great diversity of views. So even saying Black Lives Matter can spark people to tense up, when really what we're saying is, until everyone is treated equally, then yeah, we need to, pay attention to the harm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for me, I remember, from my personal social justice, for me it was Trayvon Martin back in like the early 2010s, and kind of all the series that happened after that. But I remember being in seminary at the time and hearing sermons about the Good Samaritan, and the Good Samaritan walking down the road, and being compared to Trayvon Martin with his hoodie and his bag of Skittles, and seeing that as a threat, right? So yeah, I think a lot of us as pastors see the prophetic in the scripture, right? That the prophets have kind of always challenged the people to like, there's books of the Bible that really are chastising the leaders for their injustices toward the poor, and the way, there's one verse that says like it's like they're crushing up their bones. It's like, that violent of oppression that they're doing. So when we see that in our own world, and like you said, they're our neighbors. So what you've done to the least of these, you've done to me, the Matthew 25 initiative. So I think that's really powerful, and thank you for sharing that. And it seems to me a lot of people in summer of 2020, it was really visceral seeing George Floyd and seeing that reaction, but knowing that there's so many other stories like that, whether it's in the Black community or the Indigenous community, that there's just so many stories that don't get that same publicity, but they've been happening over and over again.
Right. And think of the Indigenous community, the women who so many go missing and they're never found, they're never even looked for. So yeah, there's disparity there.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll turn a little bit more toward hope. How do we keep going in hope even when there are this, like, all these dark injustices in the world, and we'll continue to share stories with Pastor Judi and myself. So we'll be right back.
Thanks.
Welcome back. We are here in an episode of Kirk Chats, Ministry of Kirk in the Hills Presbyterian Church. I'm here with fellow Presbyterian minister Judi McMillan, who is now in Arkansas, so we're able to do this via Zoom. We've been talking about Black Lives Matter, and Black History Month is in February when we're recording. And we also had Martin Luther King's birthday in January. So at the beginning of every year, it feels like we really focus on this. Of course, we want to do it all year round. But Judi, you said you recently came across a book or have a speech that you've utilized kind of in the last few weeks.
Yeah, so just a little background on this book. It's called A Testament of Hope, and I know we want to end on a positive note with hope, but these are the essential writings and speeches of MLK. And I picked up this book when I took the class called The Radical MLK through Simmons College of Kentucky, which is a historical Black college and university. During the pandemic, they had, I think it was a 10-week course, and I took it, and it was phenomenal. And a couple of years prior, several years prior, I'd gone to Ghost Ranch, and there were writings on peace and justice. And we'd read several of his writings, like Letter from a Birmingham Jail, a few times. So, but in my sermon before MLK Day, I did share a portion of the final sermon that MLK gave the night before he was shot. And I shared the last paragraph with my congregation, and I thought I would just read that now, if that's okay.
Yes.
The sermon is called I See the Promised Land. And it says here, this was Dr. King's last and most apocalyptic sermon. He delivered it on the eve of his assassination at the Bishop Charles Mason Temple in Memphis, Tennessee on April 3rd, 1968. And it's a wonderful sermon. You can look it up. I'm sure the archives have it online, but this is how he ends it. And the next day, of course, he's killed. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop and I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. And I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. And I ended the sermon with that. I might have said a few other things, but he says he has no fear. And I think when we talked, he knew, and many years before he told his wife, I'm going to be killed for doing this. And he had received many threats throughout his life, and phone calls, and it was scary. I cannot imagine carrying the burden that he did, but having such a gracious spirit and hope.
Yeah, that definitely gives me goosebumps every time I read that or I hear that read and think about it. And of course, the biblical imagery there of Moses and being up on the mountain, but Moses wasn't allowed, he died.
To go to the promised land, right?
Yeah. And so just recognizing so often God calls us to something and to plant seeds, and we just have to be faithful. We don't always get to see the fruition of the work that we participate in, but yeah, I appreciate that so much. I mean, there's so much legacy question in there, right? Like, what legacy do you want to leave, and do you want to be on the side of justice and having done that? So, yeah,
that I would commend that book. There's just some incredible history too about the Montgomery bus boycott and all of the work behind the scenes to coordinate when they boycotted the bus system. How were people going to get to work? And so they had to hire someone to coordinate the rides so that people could get to work from their neighbors. And it was just a fascinating ministry. And you think, oh my goodness, they don't really share a whole lot of that during Black History Month or, for his birthday. But I would commend picking up that book or reading a few articles in it just to get some more of the history of what it might have been like to have grown up in a neighborhood where even then, if you were a white pastor, and usually male, preaching about social justice, your church shut you down immediately. And you would probably not be able to preach anymore in that church. And so what other avenues of support, did pastors make to help with the civil rights movement? So it's a good read.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. That kind of gives us encouragement to continue our own education and awareness around this going forward.
I'm going to challenge my leadership at a retreat this weekend to come up with a way once a year to leave the walls of the church or wherever we're meeting and go do an activity together, or go meet a group of people that you're just curious about what they're up to, and say, hey, we're a church group. We just want to know what it's like to, have your business here on the corner, or build something new, or do a service. So, just to think about, where do we want to spend our time? Because I think we got into some old routines and patterns. So I think the pandemic broke us out of some routines that maybe we needed to let go. For me personally, I think I felt a little more scatterbrained. I still feel like there's, parts of life that I wish was, just back to normal, travel. People are well, a lot of people are, get sick and can't attend everything. So that's just an adjustment to make, is prioritizing our wellness and the wellness of others and caring about people. Mm-hmm. So I think that really changed and helped us slow down a bit. I think I'm more appreciative of when I do get to be with friends or family. I think it's just very much more poignant, maybe is the word. That time together is so beautiful in ways that maybe we might have taken for granted. A church member here, retired pastor's wife, gave me a little daily devotional journal. And I thought when I got it, I never do these. I never stick with them. But I did it for 30 days. It was very good. And I'm going to continue it. But I thought, this is really good. I'm attending to some questions. It's my time with God. Whereas before I might not have done that. So I think that's been really helpful. Mm-hmm. But I used to be a planner preacher, where I'd preach out several weeks in a row. I knew what I was doing. And the pandemic kind of put the kibosh on that. I go week to week now, because you just never know what's going to happen. So yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. I think for me as well, like, appreciating what we have and the opportunities. Like I definitely am saying yes to more things when I get the chance. Like you and we went to a baseball game last summer. So
go Tigers.
Yeah, right. Just, being safe, but also being like, we had all this time where we didn't get to be together and appreciate art and sport and whatever, talent in our community. So it's going back to try and support those things and saying yes to a lot more, because I'm such an introvert. I would rather just, normally I used to just stay at home, but now we're all tired of our homes. We want to be back out and connected to each other. So, but I think that's true. I mean, what you said too at the beginning about being innovative and the pandemic kind of forced the church quicker, it was a reckoning a little bit, right? Yeah. Like it just accelerated things that have already been happening, but you could take it as an opportunity to pivot and to really embrace adaptivity, or you can just kind of be sad that the things you love are gone and grieve that. But if we do want it to continue to be vital, to take that opportunity to adapt and be creative. I love your idea about going to a group, joining someone else and saying, hey, can we learn from you? Because so often evangelism is like, we have the answer. We're going to come tell you. We have the good news. But looking for that good news in our world and really seeing it around us.
Yeah, one really amazing story here is there's a woman who's an educator. We have several retired people in our community. We're a retirement church, but she's an educator, and she thought, and everybody always says we need young children in our church, right? So you think about that. We need the young people. Yes, we get it. We all know that if you don't, the turnover is going to be not much. So, but down the street from us, just I think it's 3/4 of a mile maybe, is a Boys and Girls Club. So when you think about the church and you think about your neighborhood and you're like, we need kids. Well, God's like, hello, there's a Boys and Girls Club right here, right? So she thought to herself, well, I'm going to go and introduce myself and ask if we can read to them. They've got 3 hours after school. What are they doing? Snacks, bikes, all kinds of stuff. Yeah, so we have 10 people who've signed up, and they're taking tours, and they're going to start reading to kids. Now, does that mean those kids and families are coming here to worship on Sunday? No, they're not going to fit in our box. That's a box of our creation, right? But Jesus went to people. So we're going out and we're going to go read to children. And that is how we live our faith. And who knows what God's going to do with that? We don't know. There's seeds planted, the kindness of volunteers, being with kids and we learned some of the kids are in 3rd grade and don't know how to read. And we have teachers who know phonics, who know how to teach reading to older children. I mean, it's amazing. I think it'll be a really good match, but there's your next generation. So we go find them.
Yeah, right. And seeing the opportunity to serve where it presents itself.
Yeah.
I know people at Fox Run are often so good at this, at seeing a need and filling it.
Yeah. Well, and today, another thing of hope, we were planning Women's Sunday is the first Sunday in March, which I don't know if you're going to do anything with that, but we were sitting around the table planning, and I just thought, here are all these amazing women who've had all their life experience, and, just understanding that even this moment is a miracle. Even this is God's doing. And we think we have to go, add to the list out here and go do this, but gathering is part of that work. And so authenticity and being open. So I think the pandemic has certainly helped us reframe being loving to each other as well, and getting rid of things that are just hurtful. We don't have time for that. We don't want time for that.
Yeah. Developing empathy. That's what I've been saying to my people too, that even in storytelling, even as we're sharing our stories, we're trying to increase the empathy levels and bring down the vitriol a little bit.
Yeah. God can change us.
Yes, that is the good news for sure.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for coming and for speaking to us today. This has been an episode of Kirk Chats, a ministry of Kirk in the Hills. We have a new guest every week, and we're continuing to think about faith, life, and our changing world. Hopefully you have found some way to connect with your own faith in this storytelling, and we'll hopefully see you next week. Bye for now.
Bye. Thanks, Jasmine.